Jesus has spent the better part of 3 years teaching his disciples. They have seen miracle upon miracle. They've seen Jesus deal tenderly with the cripple, with the leper, with the woman caught in adultery, with the woman with the issue of blood. They've seen him speak to Nicodemus, the teacher of teachers, as well as the blind beggar on the street. They've seen him deal with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law, the scribes. But the truth of it all is that for the most part, they still didn't get it. Jesus is just a couple of hours away from his arrest, which will lead to his crucifixion the very next morning. He knows that, but the disciples do not. So Jesus gathers his closest friends, essentially his family now, to celebrate the Passover, where he institutes the Lord's Supper. I'll get there in just a moment. To celebrate the Passover meal. And while he's gathered them there in an upper room, Jesus tells them a bunch of stuff that he wants them to know while he's gone. This next section of John, the series we're going to call While I'm Gone, because Jesus tells them how they need to act, what they need to know while he's in heaven. And in that period of time from when he leaves the earth until whenever he comes back. So this is for us as well. Gone where? Well, we're going to have to wait for a few weeks to get to that, okay? He's going to tell them a little bit later that he's going away, but before he tells them this all-important stuff, he does something first. I've told you a few times now that Matthew, Mark, and Luke share a lot in common. They tell a lot of the same stories. But John wrote his gospel later. And it seems logical that he looks at Matthew, Mark, and Luke and says, okay, they dealt with this part of Jesus' ministry. I'm going to deal with some other things. I'm going to tell some other stories. He deliberately tells different stories in the other three. And in fact, John's going to say this at the end of his gospel. Now, there are many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the whole world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Jesus did so many things they could not all be written down, not even in 4 biographies. So we know that we don't have everything that Jesus said or did, but of course what we do have is plenty for us. Now, if you were with us a couple of years ago when we went through Matthew, you know that at this point of the story, Jesus has gathered his disciples in the upper room. And he takes some of the Passover bread, and he takes one of the Passover cups, and there he gives them a new meaning. And we celebrate the Lord's Supper, and it all stems from all of this. Jesus says, this is my body, this is my blood. And while John does repeat a few of the stories that Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about, he does not include the Lord's Supper. But he does tell us about something else that happens that night that Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not talk about. John chapter 13, I'm going to read the first 20 verses. I'm going to have you underline a couple things and highlight a few things. Now, before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, I'm going to mention his hour coming. If you want to underline that or just mark that somehow, you don't need to highlight it, but just mark that somehow. He knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. I want you to highlight that phrase, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garment and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Remember I told you that John often talks about people not understanding things. Here's a good example of Peter not understanding what's going on. Verse 8, Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. I want you to highlight Jesus' answer. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Highlight all that, please. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said, Peter not understanding, Jesus said to him, the one who says bathed is not needed to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him, and that is why he said, not all of you are clean. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garment and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, highlight this, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, and then highlight this, that you also should do just as I have done to you. That's all the highlighting, but I'm going to just mention a couple more things. Truly, truly, and I told you that phrase appears about 25 times in John. It appears twice here, so if you just want to, we're not really going through the truly, trulies, but if you just want to make note of that. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking to all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. We'll stop right there this morning. There's a bunch in here, as there always is. We're not going to be able to cover it all, but I want to start with verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come. Many times before, the gospel writers will say something like, his hour had not yet come, or his time had not yet come. In John chapter 2, when Jesus goes to the wedding feast in Cana, and his mother comes to him and says, son, they're out of wine. Remember Jesus' response to her, well, one of his responses is, woman, what does that have to do with between me and you? But he says to her, my hour has not yet come. It's not time yet. And this happens a few other times in the Gospel of John and several other times in the other Gospels. His hour is not yet here. But now in John chapter 13, it changes, doesn't it? When Jesus knew that his hour had come. It is time. Everything that Jesus has done, everything that God has done since Adam and Eve had sinned, since the beginning of time almost, has been building to this moment or culminating in this moment or this coming moment. The hour of Jesus' death is almost at hand. As I said, Jesus knows this, but his disciples do not. But I want you to also see this in chapter 1, or verse 1 rather, sorry. He loved them to the end. If you've got an older New International Version, they translate that phrase as he now showed them the full extent of his love, which is a really good way to say it. But the literal words that John uses there are he loved them to the end. Isn't that a beautiful phrase? At no time did Jesus give up on loving them, or loving us for that matter. When they doubted, he loved them. When they failed, he loved them. When they fled, he loved them. When they were afraid, he loved them. When they wept, Jesus loved them. He loved them to the end. But listen, talk is cheap, isn't it? You can say you love someone all day long, but the real proof is in the doing. All right? Now, almost as an aside, John mentions that Judas has already set in his heart to betray Jesus. This is an important detail. Later in the evening, Judas is going to leave. He's going to go do, Jesus is going to tell him, the Gospel of Matthew tells us about this. John mentions it too, I think. But Judas is going to leave, and Jesus says, go do what you got to do. You're going to betray me. Go set in motion what you're going to set in motion. Everybody else thinks Jesus is gone to go get something for the Passover. They don't realize what's going on. But Jesus knows and Judas knows. But in this moment, Judas is still there. And I want you to remember that. Because Jesus shows he loved them and us to the very end. But he shows them his love by washing their feet, including the feet of Judas. When it says Jesus loved them to the end, I want you to see that Judas is included in that. I know we just read this, but I want to make sure we have this scene properly set, okay? The washing of feet is not a custom that we're used to in modern time. But in Palestine, especially in the first century, it was of huge social significance. Practically speaking, it was needed. The roads were dusty and dirty and muddy, and they wore sandals. They didn't have all kinds of fancy shoes. They wore sandals, so everywhere they went, their feet were dirty. Got the picture? And also, when they had a formal dinner, especially at Passover, they did not sit at the table, they reclined. And in fact, when you read through the gospel, and John talks about it several times, it talks about them reclining at the table. In verse 23, we didn't read that far down, but in just a few verses later, it's going to mention them reclining at the table. And so if you can put this picture in your mind, you're laying at the table on your arm, and your feet are stuck out here, and there's somebody laying here and somebody laying there. And so your feet, or somebody's feet, are close to your face. Maybe not right in your face, but close enough to it. And so dirty feet are a problem. You got that? Okay? Now, when you invited somebody over to your house, it was part of the host's duty to provide for the washing of feet. If possible, you had a servant do it. If you were wealthy enough to have servants, there were a lot of servants back then. If you were wealthy enough to have a servant, you had the servant do it, unless you had a Jewish servant. Because the law prohibited a Jewish servant from washing another Jew's feet. That's how demeaning this was, that you couldn't even require a Jewish servant to wash another Jew's feet. So what would happen is either the host would do it himself, or he would get his wife to do it, or the children to do it in that case. But anyway, somebody was supposed to wash feet. And if nobody was there to wash feet, you washed your own feet. It was just something you did. You know, you come into dinner and your hands are dirty, you go wash up for dinner. We know that because of germs and all that stuff. So we go wash our hands. But this was not just about germs. There was a practical side to it. And it wasn't just something nice. It wasn't an add-on. It wasn't, when you go to somebody's house for dinner and you come in and they have an appetizer and you're like, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting an appetizer. That's very nice of you because it's extra, right? Or they have china out. What? You got china out for? That's very nice of you. That's extra, right? So, but washing feet was not extra. It was standard. It was the first thing you did. When you walked in the door, there was a basin of water and a towel, and either somebody washed your feet for you, or you washed your own feet, or you didn't go into the house. It's just ingrained in them. Preparations had been made for the Passover, which means there was a basin of water for foot washing at the door. There were no servants or slaves present, maybe because of secrecy, I don't know, but there weren't. The disciples all arrive, and no one washes their feet. Why not? We don't know. Have you ever held the door for somebody, especially at an event or something? You're on your way out and you go through the door and you open the door and you hold it for somebody to go through, and the next thing you know, 20 people have gone through and you're standing there holding the door and you're like, I'll catch up with y'all in a minute, and you're just stuck. Has that ever happened to you? Or same thing, you're at an event and you're in the parking lot and there are a million cars trying to get out, and you're in the main road and there's cars coming on the side, and you want to be a nice person and let somebody out, right? But if you let that one out, 5 more cars are going to sneak out right behind them, right? And you're going to get stuck. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. One commentator had this idea that if they washed their own feet, they might be expected to wash everybody else's feet. Let me paint this picture. We don't know this is what happened, but let's just get in the moment, okay? I'm going to pick on Thaddeus. Thaddeus arrives first. He walks in and he goes to the door, and there's the basin, and he starts to bend over, and he looks out of the corner, and I see somebody, and there's Peter and Andrew coming up. And Thaddeus thinks, if I stoop down to wash my feet, is Peter going to stick his nasty old feet in this basin and expect me to wash his too? Not going to take that risk. And Thaddeus kind of stands up, and he just kind of cruises on by, and Peter and John walk up and go, Thaddeus didn't wash his feet. Should we wash your feet? I don't know. What do you think? I don't. And then here comes Philip and Andrew, and they're like, no, let's go. And they all will go in one at a time. Nobody's going to stop and wash feet because they're afraid that somebody else is going to come up and stick their feet in there and wash mine too. And they don't want to do that. Because it's beneath them. It's beneath everybody. Not even a Jewish slave is allowed to do this. And so nobody stops and washes their feet. So they all come in with dirty, stinky feet. They shouldn't, but they do. Jesus comes in. Everybody's in their place. They go sit down at the table and they recline and they stick their feet up. I don't know, maybe Jesus gets a whiff. I don't know. But he notices that nobody has washed their feet. Now John says it's before Passover, which may be a better way to look at it is the meal hadn't been served yet. They had just gotten there. It's before the actual festivities began when all this takes place. Everybody's reclining at the table and Jesus gets up. Well, I want to play a clip from a movie. Somebody a few years ago did a movie called The Gospel of John where they just acted out the Gospel of John. And the only dialogue in there is from the Gospel of John, either the narrator reading it or the character saying the words. There's nothing else added. But let me show this scene.
Jesus and his disciples were at supper. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, the thought of betraying Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him complete power. He knew that he had come from God and was going to God. So he rose from the table, took off his outer garment, and tied a towel round his waist. Then he poured some water into a wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter.
Are you going to wash my feet, Lord?
You do not understand now what I am doing, but you will understand later.
Never, at any time, will you wash my feet.
If I do not wash your feet, you will no longer be my disciple.
Lord, do not wash only my feet, and wash my hands and head too.
Those who have taken a bath are completely clean and do not need to wash themselves, except for their feet. All of you are clean. All except one.
Jesus already knew who was going to betray him. That is why he said, "All of you except one are clean."
Now, it should have shown them reclining at the table more so, but you get the idea. But the thing I like about this dramatization, when I first saw it, it offended me a little bit. And then it's actually right out of the scripture here. It's that it shows Jesus taking off his outer garment and wrapping himself in a towel. You see, not only does Jesus perform the act of a servant, he puts on the clothes of a servant. He fully embraces what it means to be a slave. Even to the point of disrobing in front of the other disciples. Perhaps Paul had this scene in mind when he wrote Philippians, I have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. I want you to see how fully Jesus embraces the role of a servant here. He loved them to the end, even to the point of taking off his outer garment and wrapping himself in a towel and getting on his knees to wash the dirty, stinky feet of his disciples. Who, by the way, the other gospel writers tell us, are in the middle of arguing who's the greatest. They're having a big old fight about who's number one as Jesus kneels at their feet. God, the God of the universe who created everything, gets on his knees to wash their feet. Now I want to share with you some lessons from this scene. Jesus says, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me in verse 8. In other words, we all have dirt that needs to be washed by Jesus. I want you to see that. And what Jesus does is both practical and symbolic, or maybe better put, it's practical and it's representative of a larger truth. As I said, Peter doesn't understand what's going on. No surprise there. I told you this is one of the features of John, where John puts these people in situations where they don't get what Jesus is saying. They don't understand. And here we have Peter missing the point. And again, there's a practical side. Their feet are dirty. They need to be washed. So Jesus washes them. But when Peter says, you're going to wash my feet, and Jesus says, you don't understand now, but you're going to understand later. Because there's another layer to this, Peter, and everybody else. Yeah, your feet are dirty. They need to be washed. But I'm doing something symbolically. I'm doing something that represents something else here that you don't get just yet, but you're going to get. Peter's like, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus is like, if I don't wash your feet, you're not my disciple. You have no share in me. Because I need to wash your feet. I need to wash you. Then Peter jumps out of there. Oh, I washed my whole body. I'm so dirty. Jesus is like, no, that's not what this is about. You're missing the point. I need to wash your feet because they're dirty. But there is a symbolism here that I am going to make you clean. Okay? There's a lot of Peters in the world. Now, I don't think Peter said, don't wash my feet because he thought his feet were fine. But a lot of people out there don't recognize the dirt that's on them. We excuse sin. We rationalize it. We compare our sin to other worse sins and go, well, I'm really not that bad. I've never done that. Oh, I may have told a lie every now and then, but I've never done that. Right? We make it sound okay. Our dirt isn't all that dirty, And sometimes we're also afraid to point it out. Everybody needs to decide what's right for them. Maybe dirty feet aren't as bad as we thought they were. Now remember, there's a practical side here, but there's also this deeper meaning. Jesus indicates with his response to Peter. This is about needing your feet washed, but it's also about what Jesus came to do. That is to remove the dirt from us, our sin. Jesus is not content to let us stay dirty or to let us stay sinful, to keep the symbolism going there. Jesus doesn't look around the room at all the dirty feet and go, well, if they're okay with it, then I'm okay with it. The story does not go this way. Jesus loved them to the end, so he tolerated their dirt. The world is trying to define love as tolerance. and that it's hateful to disagree with someone else's opinion, but that is not love. To be sure, some people, even Christians, love to hate others, but they are not our example and our model. Jesus is. Genuine love addresses what is wrong. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his son. He did not overlook, he did not excuse, he did not tolerate. No, he gave his son as a sacrifice because there's something wrong and it needs to be fixed. Please do not buy into the lie that Satan has, that we're supposed to just let other people be. The loving thing is not to sit idly by while somebody's soul gets devoured by sin. First thing, our feet are dirty and we need Jesus to wash them. Second thing, we are to be servants of others, just like Jesus was. And if it wasn't such a charged word in today's world, I would have you write down, we are to be slaves of others, because that's really what this communicates, is that word slaves. So Jesus goes around the table washing their feet, every one of them, including Judas's feet, and Peter, who will deny him, and Thomas, who will doubt him. Okay, Jesus washes them all. He goes back over to where the basin has been, and he takes off the towel, and he puts his outer garment back on him, and returns to his seat. And then he says, and don't miss this, is verse 12. Look in your scripture journals there. Verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for I am so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash. Now, if this were me, and probably if this were you, though I don't really want to impugn you, but we would read this way. Since I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you ought to wash my feet. Makes sense, doesn't it? Right? I scratched your back. Now it's your turn to scratch my back. I did you a favor. Now you do me a favor. I played the slave for you. Now it's my turn to be pampered and waited on and served. But that's not what Jesus says, is it? Read the part in yellow, okay, just to make sure. I want to burn it into your brain. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, what? You also ought to wash one another's feet. You see, the debt that we owe Jesus is payable to other people, not to him. What Jesus has done for us, yes, we need to be thankful for, but what he wants us to do is to serve others. Let me put it this way. If we are not serving, then we're not following Jesus. It's just that simple. It may sound harsh, but I didn't make it up. Jesus is the one who said, I have given you an example that you should also follow, that you should do as I have done to you. John 13:14. Now, we don't wash feet in 2021 anymore. I know some churches still practice foot washing, and it's very beautiful. And in fact, right now, Amy is over there with our students, and she's washing their feet. She's teaching them the same lesson, and so she decided to wash their feet to teach them this lesson. So there's nothing wrong with us if we decide to wash feet. I'm not going to do it today. There's too many of you, and we don't have time for that, okay? But I've done it before, and I will probably do it again at some point. There's nothing wrong with actually washing feet and doing this, so I don't want to say, well, Jesus didn't want us to do it. There might be a practical time for us to do that. But there's actually another deeper meaning here. What does it mean to wash feet today? Well, for one thing, it's doing the small things. Nothing is beneath the slave. We do not need to sit in reserve until something really important comes up for us to do. And I've talked to people, I've had people have this attitude that have said that, that I'm just waiting for the big thing to come. I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste my time and energy on that. I want God to use me in a big way. I want to part the Red Sea. That's what I want to do. and washing feet means doing the small things. Nobody else did it. Jesus does it. It also means doing the hard things that nobody else wants to do. Not one of the 12 offered to wash feet. None of them. In John, we had the dramatization. We don't know if that was really real, but John does not say that at any point did any of the disciples, as they see Jesus getting up, taking off his outer garment and putting the towel around his waist, they know what he's getting ready to do. Not one of them says, whoa, 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 Jesus, whoa, no, not you. I'll wash the feet, you sit down. Not one of them stops him. When Jesus goes and washes the first guy's feet, nobody jumps up and says, I'll take over from here. Not one of them. They all sat there. I don't know. I picture them just with their eyes popping out of their head, their jaws dropped. I don't know what they're doing, what they're thinking. They let Jesus do this. Now, I mean, it's necessary because it's part of the lesson and all of that. But I just want you to see, nobody was going to do it. Nobody. But Jesus does it. He does the hard thing, and he does the thing that nobody else wants to do. And that's what it means to wash feet. Washing feet means putting your needs second. The other people's needs first. Do you remember the old slapstick comedies like the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, something like that? Every now and then they would all try to go through a door at the same time, and they would just like bunch up there and get there, and they'd back up and try it again. And then sometimes it would turn into no, you go first. No, you go first. No, you go first. And they would stand there just, ad infinitum. You go first. No, you go first. You go first. Go. Being super polite. And I mean, not trying to compare us to Three Stooges, because that would probably make the Three Stooges feel bad. But anyway, wouldn't that be cool if we lived in a world where nobody would go first? Where we constantly insisted on the other person to be first? To the point that it's comedic? No, you go. No, you go. No, you go. No, you go. I mean, that's the world in which we need to live. That's what it means to wash feet, to make everybody else go first. It also means setting aside your pride, your prejudice, and your quid pro quo. I'm not really Latin, but I was trying to make a cute little phrase there for you to remember. But quid pro quo means it's Latin for I scratched your back, now you scratch mine. It's something like that. I'm not sure, like my Latin's not really good, but it's something like that, okay? The idea is that doing to others means that they need to do it to you next. Jesus, again, this is why I like that clip of showing Jesus taking off his robe and he's just wearing his undergarments. And shocking as that may be, it's what John tells us happened, doesn't it? He took off his outer garment and he wrapped a towel around his waist. And just in case you think you've got a way out, Jesus washes Peter's feet even though Peter didn't want him to. No, Lord, don't wash my feet. Jesus would go, okay, skipping you. Jesus, I'm doing it anyway. Right? Jesus washes Judas's feet, knowing full well that in just a few short hours, Judas is going to plant a betrayer's kiss upon his cheek. And it's going to set in motion, it's going to knock over the dominoes that's going to lead Jesus to be flogged and then crucified. That's what it means to wash feet. There is no one that we should not be willing to serve. I came across this story. I love it. 1969, in America, racial tensions were kind of high. In fact, black people were not allowed to swim in the same pool as white people. There's divide in America that black people could only do certain things and white people could do other things, but they could not do them together. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, remember Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and all that? He invited a black police officer, Officer Clemens, to his show. He invited Officer Clemens to cool off his feet in a plastic wading pool on television there. And when they were done chatting, Mr. Rogers helped Officer Clemens dry his feet. Without preaching, without anything other than action, Fred Rogers did what he asked us to do. He set aside his pride, his prejudice, and just showed love. So for us, this is real simple. First of all, Jesus loved to the end, so should we. Again, I love that phrase. There are times when we get tired, I know. We get tired of loving people. We get tired of being nice. We get tired of going second. Jesus got tired just the same way, but he doesn't give in to it. He loved them to the end. Here's the second thing we need to know. Jesus served others, so should we. This is the example that he set. He told us as much, that we should follow, so that you would do what I have done. This morning, if you're already a disciple of Christ, the challenge to you is to look in your own heart and to ask yourself, are you loving and are you serving the way that Jesus did? If you're outside of Jesus Christ, we want to give you that opportunity to confess him as your Savior, to have your sins washed away, to be filled with the Spirit of God and walk as a new person. We're going to stand and we're going to sing Just As I Am. And if you have a decision to make public, just meet me down front.